Are you recording? We're recording. The genesis of this share, this talk, really goes back, I guess, a bit embarrassing when you start saying, at least 20 years. The codes really burst into the world in the mid-90s. When they did, it caused an enormous
Mm-hmm.
stir. I sat at a university in Birmingham, England, not Birmingham, Alabama, where the previous two previous chief rabbis ago, Lord Jacobovitz, sat amongst an audience of about 800 university students, the official parent body of the. I can ask you to close the door because it's going to cool us down, and then on will come the central heating, and it will deafen. Good man. Thank you very much. And so basically, he sat there as this was presented by the various organizations and speakers, and it was an amazing thing to observe. I mean, he was a serious intellectual, Lord Jacobovitz, and he was clearly very, very impressed. It was very akin to watching Kriyas Yamsuf. I would imagine the reaction of the university students to the material that were being shown when they were sitting there with their jaws literally gaping was very much the same sort of phenomenon you would have seen at Kriyas Yamsuf. People were just totally blown away. No, totally secular Jews. They were sort of United Synagogue type Jews in England, which is, I suppose, the rough equivalent of. In England, it's an interesting phenomenon. About 80% of Jews are Orthodox by synagogue membership, but by religiosity, they're more or less like conservative Jews in the United States of America. They don't know very much. At least, though, they are members of an Orthodox synagogue, so the rules they don't keep are our rules. So they recognise that's the rules they should keep. But people were totally blown away by this, and I remember one of the presenters is actually a very nice fellow, and I like him, saying that he was once presenting this material to an audience in the United States. There was a professor of physics there, I think it was physics, maybe statistics, who took away all the material, spent a month time trying to demolish it, was unable to, and his phrase was, reluctantly became frum. There was no choice. Anyway, so when it sprung into the world, it was people were utterly and totally blown away by it, and many organisations, many Kirov. I mean, for Kirov organisations, although not all of them bought into it at all, Orsamek was strongly opposed to this material. Well, by Professor Dr. David Gottlieb, who was one of the great brains of the age, and has spoken here in Inwood. He was very, very, and to this day is a rabid opponent of this material. However, there's no doubting that its impact was huge, and indeed lots of people became frum as a consequence of the codes. It was just mind-boggling. I gave a talk in Manchester, I think it was, somewhere in the 90s, which is this talk we're about to have. The title was Codes Phenomenon or Fraud, and when this was publicised, there was major Jewish organisations got together in London for an emergency meeting. This is ahead of me giving the talk, because they felt that I was going to be attacking the codes and therefore them, which I was certainly trying not to do. I'd say it was phenomenon or fraud. You normally sort of build up to climax, but I'll give you the conclusion right away. My conclusion in that year, and probably still today, is the original proponents of the codes were certainly not frauds. They were sincere. Come in. They believed. Welcome. Please close that door or we'll all freeze to death. Excellent. We have a chair. Welcome. Not a problem. They were, you come just at the right moment. I'm finishing the share. I'm starting with a conclusion, which I normally don't do. Were the proponents of the codes, the people who sold this, who spoke to audiences all over the world, who blew people's minds away, frauds? I did not and do not believe so. They were genuinely believers in the authenticity and the accuracy of the material that we're going to look at in a second. The fact that it has been largely, I'm reluctant to say the word disproven, you'll see why in a second, but certainly debunked. Almost nobody uses this material anymore, does not make them frauds. They believed it was true. If subsequently if you believed in Einstein's model of the universe, then that means that Newton's model of the universe was completely wrong. the steady state theory, the fact that the universe, as Newton believed, that it always existed. Then along comes Einstein and the 20th century world, and a Roman Catholic Belgian priest who was the one who discovered the redshift effect and therefore the Big Bang theory. And then we now believe, or we now know.
Was it the Doppler?
Sorry, yeah. But then we believe that the universe had a fixed starting point. So Judaism and science stops being at odds with each other. In fact, Judaism and science can never be at odds ultimately with each other. But that doesn't mean to say that because we now have a new model of physics that Sir Isaac Newton was a fraud. He came to the honest conclusion of, in fact, still much of what he taught is still valid. But what he taught at the time was valid given the material, the knowledge that he had. He wasn't a fraud. He may have been wrong. His models may have been superseded by new science and new ability and new techniques. It doesn't make him a fraud. So I gave this. This was publicised. I was going to give this talk. There was a huge panic in London, but it wasn't in any way to attack the organisation saying this. But I think it's still worthy of our. It still is alive. Still people quote it, and it's worthwhile sort of discussing it. This comes with a huge health warning. To really discuss this, you have to be a mathematician, and I would say at least PhD level. I don't think I could get a regents in maths. It was never my strong suit. And indeed, we'll actually be quoting shortly people who are at that level and what they have to say on the subject. Anyway, to cut a long story short, this therefore is not definitive. Rubinstein is not a mathematical genius. Anything I'm going to tell you is from other people, and you will draw your own conclusions. The only thing I'm really qualified in is Judaism. I have an authentic Jewish qualification, and I'll be able to steer us towards a Torah perspective in this. But let's just deal with the phenomenon. Let's introduce, assuming you know not too much about it, or maybe you know more than me. But what was the Codes Phenomenon? The Codes Phenomenon really burst into the scene with the arrival of personal computers in people's homes. But the actual phenomenon, at least as it's told by in the legend of the Code's proponents, was in a cattle truck on its way to Auschwitz. And a fellow called Rabbi Weissmandl, who managed to escape from Auschwitz, and he was rather a famous and heroic person who tried to alert the Allies and succeeded in alerting the Allies to what was going on in Auschwitz. Of course, the Allies already knew and didn't do anything about it. But anyway, Weissmandl, when he was going to Auschwitz, his mind was working on the fact, or he must have had a photographic memory, and he must have seen all the letters in the Torah in his mind. He worked on the fact that if you took the first Tov in Bereshit and you counted 7 sevens, that's 7, of course, very nice and Kabbalistic, you get to 49, and you count 49, you come to the next word, next letter, which is a Vav. Do it again, you get Resh, and do it again, you get Hey. Isn't that sweet? So if you count 7 sevens from Tov, you get Torah. Ooh, that's good. And in his mind, he looked at Shmot, and again, he must have had it all printed in his mind. Anyway, so he took Shmois, and he took the Tov of Shmois, and he counted 7 sevens, and he got another Vav and another Resh, and another Hey. It's Torah. Whew. Failed miserably when it came to Vayikra, failed miserably when it came to Bamidbar, and then he realized Bamidbar is the other way about. It's Tov, the other way about. So Hey, that's right. The Torah backwards, and the same in Devarim. In Vayikra, he found the 7 sevens you get Yud K Vav K. So if you've seen it in the books, they've got a little sort of half menorah, like 2 circles, and Torah with the flame sort of pointing in to the center, and there's some sort of thing to say about that. The flames point. You can talk about the real menorah doing exactly that phenomenon, but that was the start. This was apparently printed in the book with some other similar phenomena that she had discovered. And it lay pretty dormant until the arrival of personal computers, and when that arrived, then people started using the computers to look for other stuff. And when they did, they found really a remarkable large amount of it. So I'll give you a couple of examples here. This is a nice one. This is from Bereshit Aleph, Kof Dalet Tzalav, and it says, "V'yomer Elokim toisa oris nefesh chaya lemina behema bremis v'chayas eretz lemina eretz." Yeah, Eretz Lamina Vayichem. So this is the bit when Hashem's talking about bringing life to the planet. And it uses the word Elokim. The numerical value, they call it the skip distance of Elokim is 86, and it's talking about, it goes on to say, "V'yomer Elokim nasa odam bid salmenu kidumusenu." Let us make man in our image, in our likeness. And there they were able to find clustered round, I'll pass these round, clustered round with a skip distance of 86 letters. That's the gematria of Elokim. It said Selam, and then Selam, and then Selam. So in the pasuk that says that man was created, but Selam Elokim, encoded with the same value as the word Elokim, you find 3 references to Selam, which is interesting. Another example, I mean, there is thousands and lots of books come out on this subject. V'yikra Yitzchak el Yaakov Yivarach Esav Yitzaveh v'yomer lo, and God, Yitzchak calls his son Yaakov, and he says, don't marry, lo tichach isha mebenos Canaan, don't marry a Canaanite wife. Kum, lech, Padan Aram, go to Padan Aram, Beis Besua, Avi Amecha, your uncle, v'kach lo misham isha mebenos Lovan. Well, that was very nice. There, with our 7749, the computer showed you that you find Leah 77. So he was to find, of course, a daughter, ended up to be, Leah and Rachel. Leah, and then Leah again, and then Rachel. So that's nice. Sorry, Rachel twice. Yeah, Leah once and Rachel twice. Why Rachel twice? Because you had to work twice in order to get her, something like that. But there you are. That's the idea. Good. This one's good. I always like this one. I think I got this from a book that somebody gave me at the time. This says, this is Shmai Sud Aleph. Apostle tells, "V'yama Hashem el Moshe lo yishma aleichem pari." Para's not going to listen to you. Laman rabbis ma'isai be'eretz Mitzrayim, in order that I will increase my miracles in the land of Mitzrayim. And so it goes on. The one there, it's very interesting, is because the computer found that the words rabbis ma'isai be'eretz Mitzrayim is the first letters are Rambam, who of course lived in Eretz Mitzrayim. And then if you count our 49s, we lost 49s, from Moshe, of course he was Moshe ben Maimon. So if you count the first mem from Moshe, 49, you get Mishnah. Guess what's coming next? We have to jump a little bit. And then count the 49s again, and then you get Torah, Mishnah Torah. Why is there this space before? Why doesn't it continue another 49 to get you to Torah? Well, there are all these letters before you get to the Torah. Guess how many letters there are? 613. And the Mishnah Torah is the book that teaches what the 613 mitzvahs are all about. Ooh, that was a nice one. Okay, so that was that. Thank you, please. Then we'll get a little bit more solemn here. In Devarim Lamed Aleph, it says, "V'yoma Hashem el Moshe." Hashem says to Moshe, "Hincha shochav yiv abasecha." You're going to lie with your fathers. V'kol ha'am hazeh v'zona achrei Elihei hanecher ha'oretz asher hu bo shama. And they're going to follow after the beliefs and the religions of the lands in which they are going to go into. Back to 49s. If you take the hay from Moshe and keep counting 49s, when God's saying that the Jewish people are going to give up Yiddishkeit and Torah, you get the word Hashoah. Right?
Those are contrived.
Sorry?
See, the words like Hashoah and Rambam are contrived.
Let me make the case for the side of this being. We'll come to the counter argument very shortly. But anyway, I'm just giving an example. That was the argument. I'm not commenting either way. This one is very interesting. This is the bit of the Torah when it says, this is the bit in Noach, when the heart of man is rotten from the very beginning. Sorry, not this one. That's another one. This is the one. Sorry, but it's the that's the bit in the Torah. But the one quote here from Bamidbar Kof Dalet Kof Gimel, when Balaam is trying to curse the Jewish people, but instead of being a curse, it comes out as a blessing. But one thing he says is Oy miyiche misamo el. Who will live? It's talking about Amalek, and then it's talking about the Kenites, and then it says, and who will live when these occur? Misamo el. The Abarbanel apparently says on that pasuk that when it says El, it's talking about the end of days. Who will live? And it goes on. Whoever put this book together says, who will live means obviously many will die. Misomo El. So the Barbanel says it's talking about when El is appointed. At the end of days, there'll be somebody who's a terrible person, and who will live means that many, many will die. And they say there that therefore Aleph and Lamed, Ale, that's the name of the person who's going to be appointed, who will cause the destruction of or many people to assume who will survive, when will we survive. They say the Aleph stands for Adolf, and the Lamed stands for his mother Lottie, Adolf ben Lottie. This is what it says here. This is very interesting. Then, in the bit that I was telling you about before, about the corruption of man, then with their sort of 31 is our key now to give you Hitler. Then if you look there, you get with a space of 31 clustered around this. The heart of man was rotten from the beginning. Hitler with a space of 31. Hess, Hitler's deputy. Bach, another famous Nazi. Dinitz, the admiral of the Nazi fleet. Again, 31, 31, 31. And a whole other stuff. And then they look with other spaces, they find other words like concentration camp or camp, and pits and death and all sorts of stuff right there. And I saw this stuff presented, and again I've seen people go, oh wow. I mean, it's interesting. Have you ever seen? We did this in the show 2 Hanukkahs ago. I came in late, and the rabbi we had a magician there, and Jewish guy. And I walked in and I saw them looking over, and I ducked down, but I was schlepped in to be one. It's an interesting thing. If you've ever watched a magician, stage magician doing stuff, there is, for some reason, an almost, you want to believe it. I don't know why you want to believe it.
Suspended disbelief.
Sorry?
Suspended disbelief.
Yeah, suspended disbelief. And the same sort of thing here, because, I mean, just a simple check on the internet, at the time, and certainly tonight, just to refresh myself. Again, but therefore the Aleph and the Lamed. Aleph is for Hitler, and Lamed is for his mother's name. It says here Lottie. Hitler's mother was not called Lottie; she was called Carla. Would that be in Hebrew? It's a stretch, but anyway, fine. Okay, that's the sort of material that we're talking about. And then this became, of course, more problematic, because the more it was talked about, when the chief rabbi of the time, Lord Jacobowitz, when he was attending conferences in this, into one of the largest newspapers in England called the Daily Mail, and they had a whole double-page spread, Bible quotes. And then a very enterprising Israeli journalist, not at all religious, he decided this was a good money opportunity, and he brought a book called the Bible Codes. It was the #1 best-selling book in every book chart in the world. And of course he brought out a second and a third book. I mean, he made himself a lot of money out of this Bible code stuff. And as a consequence, everybody got into this. This is from Time magazine in 1997, and it's called Pop Goes the Kabbalah. And here we have a group of people from the Kabbalah Center in New York. It actually looks more like a baker's convention. They're all dressed in white. And a picture of some of the leading Kabbalists of the generation. Madonna, Roseanne Barr, this is when the media still liked her, Laura Dern, I think she's an actress, I'm not terribly sure, etc., etc. And it goes on to explain, how people are looking for this, they're desperate for spirituality and all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. And, of course, a picture of Rabbi Berg, who's now gone, who was a Borough Park boy who also saw a good money opportunity when it came along. And he founded the Kabbalah Center. This is after he eloped with his non-Jewish wife, his new non-Jewish secretary. He refused till his dying day to give his wife a get for Kabbalistic reasons. You get away with a lot with Kabbalistic reasons. Oh, Kabbalah, okay, fine, okay. And look, it's a bit of a joke, the people there. But all we need to, all of us, all we have to do is look in the Svarim of Shadas and Shuvas to find some amazing distortions. We all know the danger of Kabbalah. There was a guy called Shabsai Svi. I remember my Rosh Kolo showing me at Shuva once of there's a Shaila of Mamzeris of a fellow who came to a boarding house somewhere in their Heim, and he was in the streets. He was obviously outside with a big long white beard, and the boarding lady tried to give him meals. No, just a simple plate of soup every day, etc. He was davening. He was staying there for a week, and she was convinced that she had one of Lamed Vovnik's, if not Eliyahu Hanavi, staying with her. And one night, when Hazm was out of town, he explained to her that he is indeed Eliyahu Novi, and only by committing, not committing adultery, because not committing adultery, but having sex with him and having a child by him, then that would be the Mashiach. And the simple woman did, and she got pregnant. So there's a big shaila, over, it's almost like a rape. But I mean, there's the Kabbalah and the whole Kabbalah thing is incredibly dangerous stuff, as we know. Fine. This became general, and then it became, we'll see that's problematic in a second. Then, one of the great excitements of the time was this, in 1994, if I remember rightly, was the Journal of Statistical Science, a review journal of the Institute of Mathematical Statistics, August 1994. And this had, this is, maybe you have this at home, because it makes great reading. This volume has an article on statistical problems in genetics and molecular biology. Gripping. Bootstrap, full colon, more than a stab in the dark. Some applications of number theoretic methods and multivariate statistics. And equidistant letter sequences in the Book of Genesis by somebody called Doran Whitsom, Eliyahu Rips, and Y. Rosenberg. Now this is really good, because that meant that this had reached the mainstream. The codes had reached the mainstream because that is the journal for statisticians. And so there you can find the whole Shalom Aleichem to how it works, explaining the equal letter of skips, etc. And this over the page here, this was the pièce de résistance. These people, these three gentlemen we mentioned before, and we'll meet in a second again, had done what was known as the famous rabbis experiment. Are you familiar with this? So the famous rabbis experiment, what they wanted to do was to look for equidistant letter sequences in the book of, I think it was just Genesis, the whole of the Torah, to test whether or not there was legitimacy to this whole theory. And what they had here was they were looking for the names of famous rabbis to see if they were encoded in the Torah. To make it difficult, they wanted also their birthdays or their places of birth. And they found, I think, 50. So here they found, if we just get a quick look here, the Ravid, the Rambam, Rabbi Ramban and Rambam, the Ibn Ezra, the Vilna Gaon, and basically David Gans, etc., the Morale of Prague, etc., etc.
What did they search for? Did they search for Grua?
Good question. We're coming to that for a second. At the moment, it's well, they've got a whole thing.
I'm stuck on the contrived.
Yeah, don't worry, you're not the only one. We'll get to that. But that was I'm just giving you the headlines at the moment. I'm not going into any depths, and as I said, I'm not qualified to do so anyway. But anyways, it was very, very impressive because it went into that. Fine. At this stage, when it gets general, then at that point, obviously, if Madonna, one of the greatest intellects of the age, can be into this, then obviously other people can as well. And if we could find codes in the Torah that prove our Messiah, so could the Christians. And indeed, there was I've got it here, a paper published by somebody called Daniel Mechanic, whom you may know, who lives now in New York. He was very much in the Asia Torah discovery seminars in those days. I think he put this together. I'm not sure. His name appears first. He's not. He learned in the mirror. He's not a Baal Tshuva, but he's not a PhD level statistician either. But anyway, Doran Whitsom. So this is the people who put their material in statistical science. Is the preeminent codes researcher, it says here, and author in the world. He's dedicated his professional effort to the development of advanced techniques for detecting and testing equidistant interval encryptions in texts. And someone called Harold Gans was a senior cryptological mathematician in the United States National Security Agency until his retirement after 20 years of service. In other words, he worked for the CIA breaking codes. Okay. Here, in the introduction, they're pointing out that they're going through two books by Christian scholars. Somebody called Yaakov Ramsol, whom I assume was a Jew who's become a Christian, and some other fellow whose name I can't remember, proving that that natural fact the same codes appear, and you can find them in the Bible, proving our Bible, proving Jesus' authenticity and Christianity's authenticity. So they explain in the entire thing. Just a couple, to give you a taste of this, they say the following thing. They're obviously attacking the two Christians who are using it as Christian proof. So he says the following thing. There are two types of word patterns that are formed through sequences of letters equidistantly spaced in a document. One, accidentally occurring word patterns, or two, encoded word patterns deliberately inserted into a document, which is codes. The first type, words accidentally formed through equidistant letter skip intervals, can obviously be extracted out of the letters found in every document written throughout the history of the world. The Bible, Shakespeare, any newspaper, the instructions on any medicine bottle, this article, etc. Their existence is purely coincidental, and therefore a cryptologist would never refer to them as codes. For example, in the sentence written above, the phrase history of the world appears, starting with the T in the word the, count every 7 letters until you've spelled to, the history of the world. Did we deliberately arrange the letters of that sentence in a way that would generate the encoding of the word to? Obviously not. We never try to encode words and letters we write to friends and family, yet you can have hundreds of occurrences of those. The second type, encoded words deliberately inserted into a document, is categorically different. These types of word patterns are codes that were purposely placed in a document by the document's author. They're not random, coincidentally constructed words extracted from a text. In fact, they are codes whose intentional placement in a document can be statistically and mathematically verified. That's a big statement. We'll say that again because we're going to see that attacked very shortly. There are codes whose intentional placement in the document can be statistically and mathematically verified. In other words, it can be proven. And then they say, that's the 3 people we're talking about. So again, that was Daniel Mechanic. Doran, I think Daniel, forgive me if I ignore him because he's just a rabbi, but the 2 sort of like scientists here, Doran Whitson and Harold Gans, and we'll see why I'm ignoring Daniel Mechanic in a second, they write, a unique type of codes has been found in the Torah. 5 books of Moses. Its uniqueness lies in the fact that 1, it can be statistically verified that these codes were deliberately placed in the Torah by its author. 2, the information that was encoded could not have been known to mankind at the time it was encoded. The Torah codes claim is as follows. Names of famous rabbis together with their birth dates and death dates were deliberately encoded in the Torah by its author thousands of years before these rabbis ever lived. This claim has been statistically verified. The probability of this phenomenon is due to chances exceedingly small. Good. Now, having made that statement, they then go on to demolish the Christian proofs. Now, obviously, none of us here are, worried about that, but I think it will be, if I spend just 5 minutes taking you through what they're saying, it will be instructive as to how they claim the authentic Torah Code technique works. And they say the following thing. Statistically, one would expect, so of course they get very excited about the fact that they can prove or find equidistant letter spaces that will show you the name of Jesus, which is Yeshua, of course, in the Torah. And they say, statistically, one would expect to find the appearance of the word Yeshua anywhere you decide to look, in almost any document in the world. When you have a large text, the Torah, for example, has, any idea how many letters the Torah has? 304,805. And you search for Yeshua at equidistant letter intervals, you expect to find it thousands of times. Moreover, the accidental appearance of Yeshua will happen much more than most Hebrew words, because 2 of the Hebrew letters of Yeshua, the Yud and the Vav, are the most common letters in the Hebrew Bible. So you'd expect to find it. In fact, the mathematical expectation is that Yeshua will appear accidentally in the Torah over 300,000 times. And then to give you the figure in case you like that sort of stuff, 302,850.50 to be exact. So he says, let's focus on one book in the Torah, the book of Genesis, that contains 78,064 letters. 9,035 are the Hebrew letter Yud. Therefore, you get 9,035 starting points that could lead you to the word Yeshua. Let's simplify our search by limiting the skip distances of up to only 1,000 spaces between the letters. Right? Okay, to cut a long story short, obviously you're going to find lots of them. So now you've got 9,335 starting points, and from every starting point you can make 1,000 different searches for the Lord Yeshua. That's 1,000 times 9,035, making it 9,035,000 chances the word Yeshua will appear in the text. Okay, good. So by definition, you would expect to find it lots of times. Finding it would mean absolutely nothing. Good. And indeed, they searched for Yeshua in the Torah, and guess what? What was the figure? I think it was 10,000 times. You can find 10,000 times. Does that prove anything? Clearly not. Good. Then he goes on. It gets fun. It actually becomes quite fun. Ramsel, that's the Christian guy, writes how in chapter 41 of Psalms, Yeshua appears in a messianic passage. Now, at this point, they're jumping up and down. Everybody's getting very excited. Because what? You can find a messianic passage in our Bibles talking about the Mashiach, and encoded in that you'll find Yeshua. Ta-da! That proves, therefore, that Yeshua, their Yeshua, is the Messiah. Not really. So he says... again, we found many other Hebrew names starting with Yud and a Shin in the exact same passage. They looked for chapter 41 of Psalms. So they found the exact same, again, other Hebrew names starting with Yud and a Shin in the same passage. Furthermore, Lenin, that's, Lenin, Vladimir Lenin, also is encoded in the same text as skip distances of the Kabbalistic number 26. That's exciting. The same number Ramsel found so significant in the real word Yeshua in Daniel. In spite of these codes, we are certain that no one would conclude that Lenin is the Messiah. Well, actually, I'm not so sure. Lots of people would. Yeshua phrases, they like that. On page 21 of Yeshua, that's one of the Christian books, on page 2 to 3, at the signature of God, we are shown how the Hebrew phrase Yeshua Shemi, Jesus is my name, was found in chapter 53 of Isaiah. Christians love chapter 53 of Isaiah. However, our use of Ramsel's methodology yielded the phrase Muhammad Shemi in the Torah. In fact, Muhammad Shemi is encoded in the Torah 21 times. In addition, the phrase appears in each of the 5 books of Moses. The frame Koresh Shemi, do you remember the famous David Koresh and the Waco thing? The Davidians. He was a guy, he claimed to be the Messiah or Jesus, something like that. And they all get killed by the FBI. It was a whole big mess. But anyway, so Koresh Shemi is encoded 43 times in the Torah. Buddha Shemi and Lenin Shemi are also encoded in the Torah 18 times. So it doesn't mean anything. But you get the idea. And a little more of this I'm skipping out because we won't have time otherwise. And therefore, in concluding this paper, it says the following thing. Therefore, only words whose relationship conveys objective facts can be considered related words. For example, in the famous Rabbi's experiment, the relationship between the encoded words conveys an historical fact. A specific rabbi was born or died on a specific day. The legitimate codes in the Torah can accomplish one thing and nothing else. They can validate the hypothesis that the author of the Torah is not human. Any statement or interpretation beyond this is fundamentally incorrect. Regarding the famous rabbi's example, the only conclusion or interpretation one can reach is that the author of the Torah deliberately encoded these words. A statement such as the Torah codes prove that one should follow those rabbis in the Jewish religion is simply not true, etc., etc. So that's, I think, a very interesting insight as to what these codes are meant to be. There's a phrase in English: "Don't put all your eggs in one basket." It makes a lot of sense. At the end of this paper here, disproving the Christians, remember he said, that's how we started this off, and that is that the Torah Code's claim is the famous rabbi's experiment. That's how he started it. And he says that we statistically verified these codes were deliberately placed in the Torah by its author. The information was encoded, could not be known to mankind at the time it was encoded. And again, that's how towards the end, they come back to the same conclusion. That article in here, the famous rabbi's experiment, that and only that is a proof. Anything else, including these nice little interesting things that I showed you at the beginning and many more like them, prove nothing. In the same way, Jesus, Lenin, Buddha, anything else you find, that proves absolutely nothing. But again, don't put all your eggs in one basket. This here is the mathematician's statement on the Bible code. So this is going back. I mean, it's not really used very much anymore. But in 1998, a group of scientists and mathematicians, you had to be at PhD level and mathematics or statistical science to be able to contribute to review this material and critique it. And here we got a very large group of some of the most outstanding scientists in that field in the world, including a couple of who were ex-students of mine. Jeremy Schiff, for example, senior lecturer in mathematics and computer science at Barryland University. I used to teach him when he was 16. He was really British now. They simply went through this and just say this is total nonsense from beginning to end. Many, the end before they get to the signatories, among the signatories below are some who believe the Torah is divinely written. We see no conflict between that belief and the opinion we've expressed above, that the letters, the equal skip letter proving anything stuff is simply not true. And that's a very impressive group of scientists. Rabbi, as I mentioned, Rabbi Professor Dr. David Gottlieb, a serious mind, profound misnagid of this stuff. One of the greatest opponents of this fellow was a guy called Professor Barry Simon. And I'm not going to drive you mad going through all of this. And I've got many papers from Barry Simon on this subject. But anyway, basically, he says the following. I'll give you just a little taste of this. The Torah Codes has been much in the news lately because of the flurry of press notice that accompanied the release of Michael Drosden's book. That's the Israeli journalist who made $1 million or so every year or every month that the book came out. Which at one point was in the top 10 bestsellers list simultaneously in New York, London, Paris, and Rome. I was already contemplating a piece in questionable uses of science and pseudoscience in the Orthodox community when this explosion crystallized my decision to look closely at the codes and focus on them alone. He writes that many of the code's proponents like to use the fact that people are in awe of science, especially if you have no scientific background like I don't. And if a scientist says something, that's something you're going to really be impressed by. And then he starts to say, and because of that, I'll read this bit, because some of the code proponents like to use the appeal to the credentials of some of the scientists have made many positive statements about the codes, I'm forced to begin by stating my own qualifications, although doing so makes me feel uncomfortable. He's an Orthodox Jew. I received a PhD in physics from Princeton in 1970, but all my professorial appointments have been jointly in mathematics and physics. I remained at Princeton on the faculty, being promoted to tenure in 1972 and to full professor in 1976. I moved to Caltech in 1981, where I'm currently the IBM Professor of Mathematics and Theoretical Physics and Executive Officer, what Caltech calls Department Chairs for Mathematics. I'm a former Vice President of the American Mathematical Society, a Fellow of the American Physical Society, and a winner of the Gold Medal for the International Association of Molecular Science for work related to quantum chemistry, the author of 12 books, blah, 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 blah. He goes, oh, no. He's just trying to tell you he's not an idiot. Fine. Good. He then explains basically what we've explained, and then he goes on to say the following. He says, let's look at the Whitsom claims that we looked at before in the statistical science, etc., and go through them. Let's examine these one at a time. First, consider the notion that publication in a scientific journal is a sort of kashrut certificate attesting to the validity of the result. Which certainly the people get very excited over selling this stuff by, they always show that this has been published in the Journal of Statistical Science. So he says, I've been an editor for the most distinguished journal in my specialty for roughly 20 years, and I've pride in the high standards of my selection. But I wouldn't eat in a restaurant whose standards of kashrut were only as high as that of my journal. Referees and editors make mistakes and usually place their own research and concerns as a far higher priority than refereeing their journal. One distinguished mathematician I know says, my job as a referee is not to check the author, that's his responsibility. I'm supposed to check that the result is believable and important enough to warrant publication. Not only is this true in general, but in this particular case, Robert Cass of Carnegie Mellon, the accepting editor for statistical science, is quoted in the New York Times, and I confirmed this via email, as saying about the paper that statistical science papers the statistical science accepts. We hope the material in them is correct, but we also try to publish pieces that are amusing to a wide variety of statisticians. So it could just be in there. The fact that it's published doesn't prove anything. It could just be published because it's neat, it's cute, it's fun. Because even statisticians have the sense of humor. Mathematicians are human after all. To cut a long story, we don't have time to go through this whole thing. The bummer is that in 1999, Statistical Science brought out a new edition, rubbishing the entire thing from beginning to end. And again, that's the problem, because this paper here from Dynamic Mechanic Darren Whitson and Harold Gans said that the only proof for the validity of the Torah proofs was the famous Rabbi's experiment. But that has been blown out of the water. They like to point, I mean, I heard of it, it was first presented, they use, obviously, if you're looking for scientific fact, you need to have a control, right, a control group. The control, do you know what the book was used for these experiments, comparing the Torah to see if it was valid?
Oh, it was from Shakespeare?
No, Moby Dick. Not because they had a particular preference for Moby Dick.
They often use, like, if you have a million monkeys.
Oh yeah, computer stuff, yeah. Typewriters will come up with Shakespeare, right? The reason is Moby Dick has got almost the exact same number of letters as the Torah, so therefore if you're just looking for a document that you can look for scripts, and guess what? You can find proofs in Moby Dick. This is about the death of Princess Diana. I was once invited to meet Princess Diana, but I was teaching Torah that day and in a girls' seminary, and I turned it down on the basis that I was teaching girls. When I mentioned to the girls in the seminary that one of them was not paying attention, I said, I should be meeting Princess Diana at the moment. But I came to teach you, and they almost lynched me when the girls were, what? You're teaching? I was really good. Princess Diana. You know.
Credit or?
And well, sometimes I have post-traumatic stress syndrome from it. I'm getting over it now. And the interesting thing is that in a piece in Moby Dick, when it talks about, she was at last mortal in these jaws of death, they can find this incredible thing: the name of the driver, the name of the tunnel, the name of the car, Paris, etc., etc. It's all there. What does that proves? Nothing. Okay. Good. Sorry.
What do you make of that?
What?
That it looked like there were codes.
Well, I mean, that's what they said here. You can find codes in anything, but it has to be something, as they said, as significant as the famous rabbis. But when the statistical science thing went again, they rubbished the methodology, and as does Barry Simon and a whole bunch of people. Now, remember the title of the talk: Phenomenon or Fraud? Phenomenon or fraud? I don't think the people who were selling this. Now, some of them got a little bit carried away. One of the guys when the chief rabbi, Lord Jacobus, was sitting in the audience, one of the students asked him a question, and he said, now this guy is just a guy who learned in Mir or Brisk or something, not just, but with relevance to this. And one of the guys asked a question, and he said, do you realize that the fact to be true, it would be, and this is exactly what he did, 10 to the power 24. And I sat there going, oh my goodness. I mean, I know the guy. In fact, even if I didn't know the guy, how many human beings on the planet could make a mental calculation in 6 seconds on 10 to the power 24? That's just rubbish. At that point, it's like, no, you're an actor. You're an actor, because he is. He's a rabbi. He can't do the stats. If you ever go to, I remember when my students started going to Aish, I remember once one of them, and when this stuff, one of the organisation that really pushed this was something called Arachim. And Arachim, when they came to England, Project Seed, which I was involved with, in fact I led the first seed project in the UK, I discovered, when they had their 50th anniversary, whatever it was, or 40th anniversary, they did a brochure, and in it was a picture of this skinny little kid. Here's Rabbi Y.Y. Rubenstein in his young days. Embarrassingly. Teaching at the first seed project. Anyway, so basically, when it came, Seed wanted me to be part of the Arachim team. They were presenting the Arachim material, and I didn't want to give over anybody else's scripts. I wrote my own shirim. I was in love with the Alshich and Rabbi Dessler and all my. That's what I wanted to give over. But I went along to the seminars, and I must admit I was pretty underwhelmed. It didn't appeal to me. But when my students started going to, and again, you were going to be part of the team because you could present, but they gave you the script. It's like, going to one of these pyramid selling things, people stand out there and sell the stuff, but they've been given a script. And I just couldn't do that. Anyway, so basically, one of my students, when they went to Isha Torah, who were selling the same stuff, the Arachim material, one of the guys was giving a lecture, all my students were there, and halfway through his lecture, some guy rushed in to say, your wife's been rushed into hospital, she's giving birth now. Oh, he said, and all the students said, so the guy sort of like rushed out, and this rabbi stood up to the lecture and said, I'm terribly sorry, Rabbi, whoever he is, had to go, his wife's having a baby. However, I know this lecture, I can carry on. And he just carried on seamlessly. Right? And at that point, a lot of the students went, it's a script. And because the people therefore become actors, well, I mean, think of a famous actor who, you mentioned Shakespeare before, who's performing Macbeth. I happen to mention that just by coincidence, it just happens to be the Scottish play. But performing Macbeth, right? Now, to write Macbeth, that's impressive. Acting is a different skill, that's giving it over. But somebody who acts it can't write it, that's a different thing altogether. It's a different standard than say, 10 to the power 24 because some scientist has told you it's 10 to the power 24. But don't try and pretend to your audience that you know that. But more importantly, and because that I can talk about, here is Rabbi Dessler on the subject. Or not on the subject, because of course but on I think this is a Torah perspective. You see, because I learned in Gateshead for 7 years, and I'm a Chassid Rabbi Dessler, as almost everybody in Gateshead by definition was, or is, and this is my original Mixed Manio, which I had rebound, but you can see it's all yellowed and notes all over the place forever. But Rabbi Dessler, because of his famous essays on Bechira, that we all know that we're put into a world in which there is Bechira. And I said at the beginning of the shir that I watched university students and people with their jaw dropping and the guy who said, I reluctantly became frum. This is not a world where you reluctantly become frum. If this is a world where you reluctantly become frum, you've no Bechira. In fact, we all know that Klal Yisrael stood at Har Sinai. Har Sinai is held over their heads like a giga, it's like a barrel ready to drop on top of them. If you accept the Torah, fine, and if not, Yiskadal v'Yiskadash. Which means that Kabbalah Torah, as we all know, was innately, from a Torah perspective, a flawed phenomenon, flawed process, because we're compelled. Which requires us to come on to the antidote to that, which is the antithesis of Kabbalah Torah, because Yetzias Mitzrayim is a process by which, if you forgive the crudeness of the phrase, but God is in your face. Even the Egyptian, the wise men and the Egyptian magician said to Paro, Etzba Elokimi, duh, let them go. That's the guys from Brooklyn who were visiting at the time. Are you mad? Etzba Elokim. You couldn't miss God that you see as Mitzrayim unless your freedom of choice has been taken away, as of course something else we were discussing from last week, as Paro's had. We stood at Har Sinai. We see God. We hear God speaking to us. Are you going to accept the Torah? Yeah. Therefore, you've got no choice. That's why the antidote to that was Purim. Whereas God's in your face, if you forgive that phrase when it comes to Mitzrayim. In the Purim story, you can't see God. He's absent from the text. You have to look to see him, and then accept the Torah. That was the completion of the Kabbalah Torah process. But to have the Torah imposed on you, then there's no Bechira. We're here to choose, to make choices. So Rabbi Dessler, in page 33 of Chelik Beis Amit Milion, says the following thing: there is inspiration that you generate from yourself here in this world by the choices you make, by the shiurim you go to, by the learning that you make, or the people you learn from. And you change yourself accordingly. And there is Isrusa de La'el. But occasionally you get Isrusa de La'el, inspiration that is imposed on you without you having made any efforts to achieve it. Were the Jews worthy of Yetzias Mitzrayim? Clearly not. The Malach of Mitzrayim chasing after them, his argument in Shemayim, and why the Jewish people panicked was because the argument was valid. Okay, my people worship idols, so do your people. That was true, that's why they didn't believe Moshe. We can't get out, we're rubbish. To get to a level where you become a Yerushalayim, you become an Orthodox Jew, you accept the Torah, that's your choice and your work, your effort. The Torah says that everything comes from Shemaim except from Yerushalayim. That's up to you. But that means that everything else, if Yerushalayim is your job, everything else comes from heaven. Ahava Masara D'La'il. But love of Torah, that's something you're given afterwards. You put in the Yerushalayim, and all that struggling with Tosus and Ritvos and Rashbos and stuff, eventually God will let you enjoy it, it'll become Geshmak. The first Zohar says Nachri Mois. Shasimcha ba'ahava boys memela achra yira. When it comes automatically after you've put in the yira. V'arehin matana shemaim and it's matana shemaim. Ba'oma chazal. Piskali poska shamocha ba'ani ba'ebasach lechem b'kpitza sha'olam. And if you just start the process, I'll make a big success for you. Rough translation. Ki ala adam lihaskil b'bechinas hayira. You're supposed to start. Hashem is baruch mashalma es harba b'chinas v'ahava. And Hashem will complete it for you. Now listen to this. I mean, obviously, if that's true, and you're sitting in a university hall and you're told stuff that totally blows you away, you've done nothing. So that would defeat the whole model as we understand what we're here for. Lifa'oming, however, sometimes sometimes God will give you an inspirational experience which will be life-changing without you having, as it were, put in any effort to justify that. For example, the Exodus, which we certainly didn't deserve, but God gave us incredible miracles as, for free, if you like. And he says, then he says an amazing thing. But if you are given it as a free gift, God will take that effect, that hashpah, that phenomenon, or the effect it had on you, away from you subsequently, to see whether or not you internalized it. So the reason that he gives it to you in the first place is, well, wow, that's incredible. Now, good. Now it's then taken away from you. And when you see that, the Jewish people 3 days after Kriyas Yamsuf, which is pretty big, after all, what a shifcha, what a little girl says, saw the sea was greater than that, says the Gemara of Yecheskel ben Buzi, a Kohen. But yet, as Reb Simcha Zissel says, why is she called a shifcha then? And he's called Yecheskel ben Buzi, a Kohen, a Novi Yecheskel ben Buzi. He's still called a Novi because he put in the work to become a Novi. She got it as a free gift, so she still remains a shifcha, but he's a Novi because he worked to become a Novi. And if the Rabban Sham gives it to you as a free gift, it's always taken away subsequently. If you work at it and it becomes yours, then it stays yours, unless you throw it away. But if you're given it as a free gift, God always tests you afterwards to see if you absorbed it and made it yours. So what would a Novi do if he went into a desert and there was no water? How would a Novi react? I would daven. But they didn't. Oh, why'd you God bring us here? Don't like it. It's good. I mean, it's a tourist attraction. You go scuba diving in Egypt. What are we doing in this desert? Right? That wasn't the reaction. Why? Because they weren't really Nevi'im. So here's the rule. Whenever God takes away from you, then it's going to be given to you. It's going to be taken away subsequently. Here, I'll read the Hebrew. Therefore, he's given you a ha'ora, an illustration, so you get an idea. To see whether you took that and internalized it and made it you. Fine. Now, just at the end here, and we're coming to the end. And with that introduction, I want to tell you something that's well known about the Vilna Gaon. In the course of a Gaon, Reb Chaim Volozhin says, Talmud Reb Chaim Volozhin writes, in his introduction to the Gra Sefer, the Safra de Tanissa, the Vilna Gaon did not want, as Rabbi Yosef Karo did have a malach who came to teach him secrets in the Torah. The Vilna Gaon was made the same offer, if you like, and to have a malach come to him, and he refused it. He only wanted that which he had achieved through his own efforts and his own work. And says Rabbi Dessa, I never understood this. What do you mean he refused? Angels, wasn't an angel popped down and said, look, I'm bored today. Let me teach you some really deep Zohar stuff. An angel is a messenger. If he's here with that proposition, it's because God's given him the message to go off of that proposition. And God is going to give you insights. So how on earth can you refuse? Abel Hagra, listen to this. Abel Hagra, but the Vilna Gaon, in his humility, in his humility, he felt he not put in sufficient work to justify be given the free gift as a reward. The im kain, and if so, tishar hashba ru rak mal'il, and therefore it would be a free gift. And here's the 7 words underlined. Yore, and he was scared. Mehanasyanis, from the tests. Shiyova achakach bivadai. And he was terrified that the test would, that if he's not generative, it wasn't worthy of it. That would come afterwards, bivadai, inevitably. So therefore, to go back to our subject, where are the original proponents of the code stuff, frauds? I definitely don't think so. They may have been over-enthusiastic, naive, and I don't mean that pejoratively, it's passionate. And they certainly wanted to save Klal Yisrael and save the world. As Reb Noach of Isha Torah always used to say when I met with him once, you've either got a program or a pogrom, and he believed that. And if the gates to heaven are opened by sincerity, he walked straight in. There's no doubt about it whatsoever. However, this original sincerity was also a mixture of, lots of people who really didn't know, like me, at the highest levels, or in my case, the lowest levels, mathematical statistics, and they were trusting that it was all okay. In the same way, if 100 years ago you studied physics, you trusted you would have been taught Sir Isaac Newton. You would have thought that was okay. But nobody would teach the Newtonian model today without saying, incidentally, there's a guy called Einstein who challenges this. Just thought you should know that. If somebody is teaching this stuff today and not telling you that there is as much counter evidence to the validity of that, then you become a fraud. Then you're phony. You certainly can't lie, and do tricks to teach Torah. That's the Torah. The Chasima of Hashem Yisborach is emes. So I don't think it was a fraud. However, there's an interesting challenge. And the interesting challenge is the one that applies to all of us. If something really happens in your life which really blows you away, you've really got to internalize that. And the Ramban says, the end of Parshas Boy, famously, the big miracles in Mitzrayim were there to teach us the small miracles that happen to us all the time. And how often? Well, every day we say in Moedim, every day. So are you internalizing the big mega and making it into are you aware of that? That's something you can certainly pay attention to and certainly take from this whole experience. So if somebody was turned on to Yiddishkeit, here's an interesting question. Suppose somebody's a complete zero Jewish background and he went to one of these things at some university. He was blown away. He became religious, or she became religious, or they became religious, and they get married and they had kids. And then, 1994, that was published. 5 years later, they bring out saying it's total rubbish. It's total garbage. What's going to happen to the Yiddishkeit? The whole foundation on which you built your Yiddishkeit was this. If it's now exposed as being nonsense, then what's going to happen to your Yiddishkeit? Well, it depends. If, as Rabbi Dester points out, that you used that as the springboard and then went on to get involved in Torah and Yiddishkeit the way that we've always been involved with Torah and Yiddishkeit in the exact same way that the Rambam talks about and the Sforim talk about, and we've learned the Chumash, then you learned Rashi, and then you learned Ramban, and then you learned the Mishnah Berurah, and then you learned Shulchan Aruch, etc., and Gemara, etc. Fine, okay, it doesn't matter, because it was only a springboard. I grew from that, I went from that, and then I went higher. Okay, and they were sincere. If, however, that was all, that was your all, you rested on a shrissa de la'el and an artificial removal of bechira, as happened in Kriyas Yamsuf, then it's always removed. You should have seen this coming, or they should have seen this coming. It was written Rabbi Dessler. You should have seen it coming because that's always going to be taken away, and then you're standing there naked. The clothes have been taken back to the store. You have nothing to cover yourself with. But if you've merely used it as a springboard, then your Yiddishkeit is secure. If you didn't, then I wonder how many people, as it were, joined and then unjoined themselves when, as it were, what they built themselves on was taken away.
Do we know about any of these fellows?
Oh
They
yes.
were blown away. How they
Oh
still
yes.
live.
Well, there's a fellow who's the Rosh Shiva at a place called Chappelle's. He told me, and he used to teach in Asia Torah, and he told me he said to somebody who'd become frum through the codes, and what if it was, this is before it was all disproven, and he was very skeptical anyway. Where he said, what if it's disproven? I'll have to give up. But that makes sense if that's what you build it on. But I say it's not a problem as long as you look upon it as a staging post, as a beginning, right? Holiest, etc. I mean, if it was fraud, if it was sold fraudulently to you, then I think then you're really going to be in trouble. But if somebody became frum today because somebody sold them this stuff without saying that there's any counter argument, then you would feel betrayed in every way. You would say the stuff's garbage and the person that sold it to me is garbage, or you might do. Then it's extremely problematic. But if you say, which is my conclusion, the people selling this stuff were really sincere people, they were good people, and they honestly believed in it, they're wrong. Nobody would call Sir Isaac Newton a fraud. He was just right with the material he had. And now we've got other new material. So I would move on. They can move on. Again, the only problem is, did they not move on? Did they sink into real Torah, taught the real old-fashioned way that goes back to a mountain called Sinai? If they did, that's not a problem. If they didn't, that's a worry.
A fellow like Acher, one of the deep end.
Yes.
So his famous Talmud there was pretty strong. He even continued to learn from him after his demise.
Tricky.
But I wonder, like, what happened to the other Talmud then? Did they go?
Oh yeah, so Rabbi Desta writes, and I've seen it other times as well. Acher wasn't just he went off; he was a recruiter. He tried to get thousands. He was the leader of a movement. Yeah, he was he'd formed a reform. He was a beginner of Reform Judaism, or whatever you want to say. Yeah, but there's a whole thing about the Gemara talks about that. They got him out of hell, and they got him out.
What's that?
They got him out of hell.
Yeah.
There was some sort of process even from that coming back, and I mean the Gemara talks about that with regards to Menashe Melech Yisrael. I mean, there seems to be tshuva for effectively anything, for everything, even when you corrupted thousands of other people, which is a hard thing to say.
I mean, what happened to his Talmud? Did they say, well, our teacher was a fraud, so...
Well, I mean, what happened, a counterexample, and I can't believe it's any different, was when Shabsai threatened by the Sultan, you either become a Muslim or you're going to be killed. And the great Mashiach became the Muslim. Tens of thousands of Jews became Muslims. Not Mohammad became Muslims as a consequence as well.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
What the kufa was
But he was not necessarily
Sorry?
never...
That's the 90s.
He was never sincere.
Who?
Shabtai Tzvi.
Look,
Elisha ben Avihu was sincere.
there's a lot to say about Elisha ben Avihu. We can do a share in Elisha ben Avihu,
He may have been a little shloy l'shma, but he was sincere.
Well, he says he wasn't. He said, I mean, his explanation of his behaviour was that my father started me off wrong. But there's lots to say in that.